Hare Krishna. Yeah. So do we, because you chant the Damodar, you also chant Radhamani? Okay. Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, Srimad-Bhagavatam translation purport by Srila Prabhupada. I'll just tell you a little bit about this verse so you have some idea what you're chanting. The subject of the verse, subject, verb, object, basic grammar. Like, I see you, I is the subject, see is the verb, you are the object. And so here the subject of the sentence is the last word, dharmavit, which means a dharma knower. A dharma knower. So a dharma knower, na hanti, that's the verb, does not attack, does not injure. So the subject and the verb of this sentence are very simple. That dharmavit na hanti, a dharma knower does not injure. Hanti so does not injure who? And the rest of the words in the verse, which all end in M, are the objects of that verb. So he doesn't kill this, that, the other thing, and so on. So it's a list of all the people that a dharma knower doesn't injure. That's grammatically what the sentence is. And of course, because it's against dharma, because that person is a dharma knower. But one thing I just, first Sri Bhakti, you should know this also. In the way you pronounce Lord Nrsingadeva's name, devotees often say Nrsimha as if it's an M. It's actually not an M. It's an M with a dot over it, or dot under it, depending on the notation, which is not an M in Sanskrit. It's just a Roman letter to indicate what is called in Sanskrit anuswara, a pure nasal sound. And so singha is just like the English word sing, like sing me a song or something, and I'll join the Hare Krishna movement. So if you think of the word sing, it's Nrsimha, not M. It's actually not an M. The M with a dot is a different, it's actually the pure nasal sound, sing, or ding, ding, ding. That's the pure nasal sound. So now we'll go through the list of all the people that dharma that doesn't injure or kill, actually kill. Hanti actually also doesn't kill them. So please repeat, matam. Matam, I'll say, it's nice sometimes you have some idea what you're chanting. Matta is from the Sanskrit verb mad, M-A-D, which means exactly the same thing in English, mad, like crazy, like he's gone mad. And so in Sanskrit, and madden, like gone mad, is matta. So in other words, a dharma killer doesn't kill someone that's gone mad, or crazy. And then pramattam. This is just, like these are all basically the word matta with different prefixes. So pramatta means something Sanskrit like really mad. And it can also mean like distracted, like someone who's just like not paying attention. It's like I saw in a boxing match where the other boxer actually thought the referee had stopped it, so his opponent came and knocked him out, which was like really not good sportsmanship. So pramatta means that you're just not paying attention. Prabhupada translates it here, intoxicated. It can also mean intoxicated. It can mean both those things. For example, like a seductive woman in Sanskrit is called pramada, from the same root, meaning someone that kind of makes men forget whatever they were supposed to be thinking about. So here's the word pramada. And then unmatam. That translated insane. Un means like up, like really like madness is just really out of control. So that's unmatam. And then suptam, asleep. So it's obviously the English word is related to Sanskrit. Sanskrit Swapna or Supta, English sleep. So the same Indo-European word. Balam, a child. I guess you can read it. Yeah, why not? Striyam. You all know what Stri is, right? It's a woman. So in other words, you shouldn't kill women. Should be an obvious point. Jadam. Jadam Brahma translates foolish. It also is used in the sense of someone who's, well, I guess what we're supposed to say now, mentally impaired. Someone who's actually, we used to say retarded, but you can't say that now. So it's mentally impaired. The Jadam, like Jad Bharat. Jad Bharat because he pretended to be kind of, I have no idea. So, Prabannam, this is the common word for surrender. Like often in Bhagavad Gita, when it's translated surrender, this is the Sanskrit word. Prapadyate is the verb. Past passive participle, surrendered is prapanna. In other words, if you're fighting and your enemy actually surrenders to you, you don't kill him. That's the idea. Prabannam Viratam means no chariot, lost their chariot. And Bhidam, afraid. So like if you're fighting your enemy is like really afraid, kind of like that's like tapping out or something. Okay, so now we'll chant this verse. Mattam pramattam unmattam Suttam balam sriyam jadam Prabannam viratam bhitam Ripum hanti dharmavit. Of course, the ripum means ripum here in the accusative case, the object of the verb means the enemy. Shouldn't kill an enemy who's any of these things. By the way, just one little interesting linguistic note. That in Sanskrit, when a word, often when a word is the object of the verb, like I know you, or I cut the bread or something. So it's the object of the verb, and so they put an M, the letter M at the end, which indicates, if you know Sanskrit, you know that means it's the object of the verb. And we still have it in English, actually. There's at least one word in which English still makes a word the object rather than the subject of a sentence by putting an M at the end. Do you know what that word is? Whom. Yeah, exactly, whom. Who is the subject. If you say like, who goes there, or who knows this. But if you say, you are seeing whom. Of course, a lot of people don't do it anymore. It can sound like sort of pretentious English, but if you say, I see whom, the person whom I see, that M makes it the object of the verb, which actually is Sanskrit. So anyway, so we'll do it again. Mattam pramattam ummattam Suttam balam sriyam jaram Prabannam viratam bhitam Ripum hanti dharmavit. Does anyone want to try your luck? So any ladies? So I've already explained what the words mean. Now Prabhupada's translation. A person who knows the principles of religion does not kill an enemy who is careless, intoxicated, insane, asleep, afraid, or devoid of his chariot, nor does he kill a boy, a woman, a foolish creature, or a surrendered soul. Prabhupada's purport. An enemy who does not resist is never to be killed by a warrior who knows the principles of religion. Formerly, battles were fought on the principles of religion and not for the sake of sense gratification. If the enemy happened to be intoxicated, asleep, etc., as above mentioned, he was never to be killed. These are some of the codes of religious war. Of course, Kurukshetra really was coming at the very end of Dwapara Yuga, and they basically broke all of these rules. And that's interesting. If you read the unabridged Mahabharata, you know, it's just like before martial arts thing, the two fighters come together and the referee tells them, okay, I want you to obey all my instructions, don't do this and don't do that. And so it was like that. At Kurukshetra, if you read the Mahabharata, before the war started, the leaders of both armies got together and, you know, they agreed on the rules. And then once the battle started, they followed the rules for about the first 5 minutes. For example, one of the rules they agreed to was not to kill chariot drivers, which that rule lasted about 5 minutes. So you can see that's really coming into the Kali Yuga, just on the cusp, so to speak. Just Kali Yuga is just about to happen, and people are not following the rules. Another reason people didn't follow the rules of Kurukshetra is because there were a lot of asuras on the battlefield, and asuras often don't follow the rules. In fact, if you look at Bhagavad Gita, chapter 16, when Krishna explains the asuras, one of the things is they say that there's no God. In other words, there's no absolute rule maker. And so if there are some rules, it was just somebody's opinion. And we don't have to follow it. So that's the asura attitude. Anyway, so Prabhupada says, formerly war was never declared by the whims of selfish political leaders. Of course, that's exactly what happened in Kurukshetra. War was declared by a foolish, selfish political leader. So Prabhupada was talking about general principles that were followed when the earth was not infested with asuras, and you could say wannabe asuras. So these are some of the codes of religious war. War was carried out on religious grounds, free from all vices. Violence carried out on religious principles is far superior to so-called non-violence. Now that may sound controversial, but it's not. For example, just to give one example, there was recently, just a few days ago, actually, a couple days ago, a tragic case where some crazy man went into a yoga studio in Tallahassee, Florida. It's the capital, Florida. It was a hot yoga studio. And Jaisita is a distinguished hot yoga teacher. But anyway, really good potential. So he went in there with a gun and actually killed 2 women. There was an older woman, not real old, and then a younger woman. And then apparently what all the reports said is that the other yoga students or maybe the yoga teacher, they actually overpowered the guys, so they were not nonviolent. So if they would have said, well, come on, we're yogis, let's be nonviolent, and all of them would have been killed, that would have been vastly inferior to attacking that person who, when he was overpowered, killed himself, which was the only good thing he did that day. So, yeah, so that's what Prabhupada's saying. You know, you can say, well, no, violence is never better than nonviolence, but like, get real. Like, read the news, know what planet you're on. And so, yes, if by so-called violence you save the lives of innocent people, that's better than just sitting around chanting Om. Well, you know, innocent people get slaughtered. So that's actually the point that Prabhupada's making. Anyway, I'd like to explore a little bit Prabhupada's use of the word religious, which he uses a lot. He says, a person knows the principles of religion. Then he says, the person who knows the principles of religion. Formerly, battles were fought on the principles of religion. These are some of the codes of religious war. Formerly, war was carried out on religious principles, and that violence carried out on religious. So that's really the theme of this purport. He mentions it maybe 8 times. I haven't counted exactly. Prabhupada keeps saying over and over again, religion, religious principles, and of course the word he's translating is dharma. The word dharma. And for example, Sarva Dharman Pradikteja, giving up all principles of religion, surrender to me. So what does the word dharma really mean? Oh no, actually, I'm going to keep this one. It's really good dharma. Get your cotton thing. And so, I'll tell you what religion doesn't mean, or what the word dharma doesn't mean. What the word dharma does not mean is just, certainly in this context, and in general, in the Bhagavatam, Mahabharata, what it doesn't mean is an organized religion. Like, for example, if you think, like, give up all other religions or religious principles, it means, like, give up Islam, give up Christianity, give up Judaism, and so on. I mean, of course, that's what we did join the Hare Krishna movement. But that's not what the word dharma means here. And I'm not anti-institution, by the way. I mean, I actually joined a religious institution. Here I am, in the official institutional uniform. So I'm not going to give an anti-institution rant here, but we just have to understand what the word means. Interestingly, if you look at the Bhagavatam, you may have noted, you may not have noted, that in the Bhagavatam there are no institutional religions, or there are no religious institutions. I mean, do you think of one in the Bhagavatam? If you read the Mahabharata, there are no religious institutions. Some people who are most fortunate worship Krishna, some people worship Shiva, some people worship the goddess in various forms, or whatever they're doing. But we don't see anything like a religious institution. And so therefore, when Krishna says give up all dharmas, very unlikely he means give up other religious institutions, because there weren't any. So what does the word dharma actually mean? I'm not saying there shouldn't be today, because the world is very different. And in the modern age, actually life does tend to be institutional in a way that it wasn't back then. And the alternative to, let's say, institutional life nowadays, the alternative isn't freedom and sort of this beautiful state of nature. The alternative is really anarchy and chaos, just because of the conditions of Kali Yuga. So anyway, what does the word dharma mean? The word dharma comes from the root der, or the way Dolis would say it, D-H vowel R. That's what it is. The vowel R, by the way, for those phonetic fans out there, the vowel R, the R with a dot under it, is not R-I, so it doesn't, it's like you can say Krishna, or in some parts of Latin America, Krishna, but actually the vowel R is not R-I. There actually is a letter R in Sanskrit, and there's a letter I, and if you mean R-I, you just write R-I. Surprisingly enough. The vowel R, perhaps the easiest way to explain it, because it's in the word Krishna, so we should know what it is in English, by the way. English does not, unlike Sanskrit, the English alphabet is not a phonetic chart. It's actually total chaos. Like A is a diphthong vowel, B is a soft labial consonant with a long, simple vowel. Anyway, I won't go into it, but it's all over the place. C, the Sanskrit alphabet, the English alphabet, in terms of scientific linguistics, is just total chaos. Whereas the Sanskrit alphabet is actually a phonetics chart. It's completely scientific. In terms of vowels, first simple vowels, then complex vowels, first diphthongs and triphthongs. And then each row, like the K row, simply means guttural sounds. And I won't go into I could give a whole talk on Sanskrit phonetics, but suffice to say it's very scientific. So in English, we don't have a separate letter, as in Sanskrit, the vowel R, because people didn't think very much about phonetics when they came up with the English alphabet. But we have the vowel R in English words like, for example, bird, like see the bird, see the swooping bird. Feel the swooping bird. Anyway, so it's a little Australian example there. So, so if you think of the English word bird, the vowel is written B-I, but the vowel is an I. You don't. If you actually pronounce the I, you'd have a different English word, namely beard, as in Blackbeard the pirate. So even though it's written with an I, it's actually the vowel R, bird, or the word curd. You know, we don't say coord. Coord, we say curd, so the vowel's the R. Anyway, I can't remember why I brought all that up. But. Oh, because in the Sanskrit root for dharma, it's dur, D-H-R. That's why sometimes, you know, I say like Gurhasta. People think I'm joking, like as if, you know, Grihasta men are tigers or something, but actually that is the vowel R, Gurhasta. So it's, you know. So in the Sanskrit root dur, D-H vowel R, it means to hold, to sustain. And that's the same root that gives you dharma, gives you also, like, let's say, like holder, dhara, as in giridhari. So Krishna is called giridhari, the mountain holder. That's what it means. Dhari means the one who holds, from the same root as dharma. Or, for example, Krishna's chakradhara, the chakra holder, or gadadhara, which some devotees very charmingly say gadadhara. You know, gadadhara, in the word gadadhara, dhara, it means, gada means club. So a club holder, Krishna holds a club, so therefore he's gadadhara, or chakradhara, or padmadhara, which means he holds a lotus flower. So that's what dhara means. I mean, or for example, in Ashtanga Yoga, the fifth stage of Ashtanga Yoga is dharana, right? Which means hold on. It's like, you know, yoga, you do the yama, niyama, then the asana, and then the pranayama. Oh no, it's the sixth stage, then pratyahara. Prati means backwards or counter, like whatever direction you're going the opposite direction. That's one of the meanings of prati. So ahara means our senses are like trying to enjoy the world, and so when you counter that motion, you bring your senses within. That's prati ahara. And so it's not natural for us now because our senses are all over the place. So therefore, it's interesting in Ashtanga Yoga, once you bring your senses back, pratyahara, then like hold on. You know, hold on. Don't let the senses pop back out. And so therefore it's called dharana. That's all it means. It means hang on. And so, but again, those are all uses of the word of that root dhara. Now if you go to the word dharma, now that we've talked about some of what that root actually means, so what does it mean to be the dharma of something? Now, if you look at the use of the word dharma in the Shastras, one of the older uses of the word dharma is to mean an essential characteristic, which is actually the meaning Prabhupada points to when he explains the word dharma. Like liquidity is an essential characteristic of water. If something ain't liquid, it ain't water. And so, in that sense, liquidity holds the identity of something. It holds the identity, it sustains the identity of something, and which is another way of saying an essential characteristic. For example, if you read Mahabharata and some of the older passages, one of the poetic ways of saying that someone died is they'll say that the Kala Dharma overcame the person. In other words, time Dharma, the essential quality of time, which is that it kills everything, overcame that person, the Kala Dharma. So in that sense, Dharma can mean the essential characteristic. Now, that being the case, how do we get the word Dharma as religion? Interesting question, and for a slight additional fee, I'll explain. So, first of all, let's talk about Dharma, not in the highest sense, but in a more, you could say, human sense. For example, when Bhishma is on his deathbed, the bed of arrows, and the Bhagavatam describes all the different topics he discussed. He discussed things like Raja Dharma, which is royal, like King Dharma, which means there are special duties for kings. like the government in Australia or anywhere else can do certain things you can't do. Or as the common saying goes, you can't take the law into your own hands. Therefore, certain people are authorized to do certain things in governance, and that is called Raja Dharma, the ruling Dharma, or the ruler's Dharma. And there is Sri Dharma. There are special duties for women. And so this way we can talk about Vaishya Dharma, or Brahmana Dharma, or Shudra Dharma, or Grihastha Dharma, or Sannyasi Dharma. And so the idea is that by performing, just like, for example, let's say someone's a doctor. So if you're a doctor, you hold on to your identity as a doctor by following rules for doctors. If one engages in medical malpractice, in whatever way, you lose your medical license. So in order to hold on to your identity as a doctor, you have to perform Dr. Dharma. You have to follow the rules for Dharma, for a doctor. Similarly, to be considered a respectable lady, you have to, well, if you're a man, this doesn't apply to you. But if you actually have, you have to be in a woman's body in this life. And if you want to be a respectable lady, if you want to be just respected in society, if you want to be respected by respectable people, then you have to follow the rules, the Dharma of women. And men, the same thing. If you want to be respected in your position, you have to follow the Dharma of your position. And so in that way, Dharma is a set of boundaries and rules that preserve your social identity. And so the person holds on to that identity. Again, among rational, respectable people, you are given that the respect of being a doctor or a king or a respectable woman or a respectable man or whatever, because you follow the rules for your position. In Brazil, for example, they have this sort of clever Krishna conscious type sign they put on all the highways, which in Portuguese is "Quem obedece a sinalização evita acidentes," which means one who follows the traffic rules avoids accidents. I mean, think about it. If you think about traffic laws, they're made in such a way that if everyone follows all the traffic laws, in theory, there would be no accidents. If everyone kept a safe distance from the car in front of them, if everyone drives within the speed limit, if everyone signals properly before turning, if everyone pays attention to the signals of other drivers. In other words, if everyone followed the rules, there'd be no accidents. That's why the rules are made that way. So that large numbers of people traveling at high speed can all arrive safely at their destination. So ultimately, if you say like, why the rules? Ultimately, the rules of Dharma are made so that you can have millions of people in a civilization, sometimes even in one city, and everyone is rushing about pursuing their own goals and interests, and yet there's no conflict. So ultimately, the goal of Dharma is to avoid conflict and to keep people in their lane, like don't go out of your lane, your social lane. So that's the idea of Dharma. Now, how does it come to mean religion, or why does Prabhupada translate religion? Just as there are social dharmas, and there are, there are community dharmas or dharmas for families, and so in fact, Arjuna's concern in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita was that in what was, Vedic society, like every society, is mostly made up of families. And so Arjuna was concerned that Kula Dharma would be destroyed. Because if we kill all these men, you're going to have literally, millions and millions and millions of widows walking around, and no one's going to be there to father the children. And we know from very reliable social science that in families where there's no father, it's much more likely there's going to be a lot of trouble. So Arjuna is kind of, what Arjuna is saying in Bhagavad Gita is confirmed by modern social science. And so he's concerned about Kula Dharma, family Dharma. Anyway, so how does it come to mean religion? It's important to understand that in ancient India, and for that matter, I mean, not even ancient, just you could say pre-industrial, you could say in pre-modern Europe, really everywhere in the world, there is no such thing as secular society. The idea that you can neatly divide, you know what secular means? Not religious. Secular, like for example, in a secular society, like in Australia, hopefully there's no state religion. It's not there's one religion which is the official state religion. Therefore, Australia is a secular society. Whereas, for example, nowadays in many Muslim countries, that is the state religion, and therefore they are non-secular societies. So, now secular, I should point out, is not the same as sectarian. It's not the same as sectarian. Sectarian means you have different competing religions and the government chooses one of them and they get all kinds of privileges and favors, like in becoming the state religion. So England, curiously enough, is a secular society, but you know, they just won't give up these beautiful ceremonies. And so coronations take place in churches, Anglican churches, actually. And so that's an interesting example where they still keep some of the pomp and ceremony. It's a tradition, but for general purposes, it's a secular society. Anyway, so if you look at India, if you look at ancient Bharatvarsha, if you look at the world of the Mahabharata, or the world described in Srimad-Bhagavatam at the time of Krishna, it's not a secular society in that, for example, Yudhishthira performed an Ashwamedha sacrifice or a Rajasuya sacrifice. In fact, all the kings were performing such sacrifices, and in the modern sense of the word, that would be a religious, that would be, you know, mixing of state and religion. So I would argue that's not really what it was, that actually, let's say, the Vedic culture was apparently only superficially, you could say, non-secular, or they have state religion. Because, in a sense, accusing the Vedic culture of being non-secular, of combining state and religion in a way no longer considered appropriate, involves circular reasoning. Do you know what that is? That's when you try to think about things and you run around in circles. I'm just kidding. If circular reasoning means, I mean, the general structure of an argument is that you have premises and then a conclusion. Like the most obvious, like typical example they've been giving in Western classrooms probably for thousands of years is the typical syllogism that premise 1, Socrates is a man. Premise 2, all men are mortal. Or you could reverse those two, it doesn't matter. Premise 2, all men are mortal. Conclusion, Socrates is mortal. So the way this logic works is that if it's true that all men are mortal, and if it's true that Socrates is a man, then it must be true that Socrates is mortal. Now, what if I say, for example, I'll give you an example of a circular, well, yeah, I'll give that example. It's a simple one. Let's say, for example, I'm trying to show that there's a real material world outside my mind. I'm not just imagining all of you. That would be tragic for all of you, right? You don't really exist. Probably the worst thing that ever happened to you. Anyway, so let's say I'm a scientist and I'm justifying my assumption, which I can't logically prove, but I want to justify my assumption there's a real world out there, that the world operates according to regular laws, and that therefore we are capable of discovering those laws, and therefore we can do science. So, and someone says, well, how do you know there's really a world out there? And I say, well, look, you can just touch this microphone. You can see this is a real microphone. You can touch your own body and see that you really exist. That's circular reasoning. Because if you go back to the Socrates thing with premises and conclusion, what I'm trying to prove is that there's a real world out there. And yet, this microphone really exists only if there's a real world. Because if the world's an illusion, then this microphone is just one little example of that illusion. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to prove there's a real world, but I'm giving my conclusion as an argument for itself. You see what I'm saying? I'm giving the conclusion is things out there are real. So I'm giving the microphone, I'm giving this proof there's a real world, the claim that there's a real world. So the proof is actually the conclusion, so it's just going around in a circle. A normal argument should go like, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. It should just proceed step by step. When it just goes around in a circle so that the evidence and the conclusion are the same thing. So anyway, that's called circular reasoning, or begging the question. So our claim would be that, let's say, the contents of the Bhagavatam, the knowledge given in the Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and other books, that information is actually an accurate, objective description of reality. It's an accurate, objective description of reality, and therefore it's not religion in the sense of something which is non-secular, it's just a description of reality. So that when Krishna describes himself in Bhagavad Gita, it's not a religious claim, it's just a factual description. Now you could say that it's religious in the sense that in our culture, any claim or any book about or knowledge about the nature of God or the nature of the soul, we call religious. That's the name we give to it. That's religious. And people will say, well, you claim your knowledge is true, but so does everybody else. So therefore, we cannot make you the state religion, because that's what everybody wants to be. And plus, you can't prove that you're right and somebody else is wrong. And there's so many competing claims. Every religion claims they're right, and they all contradict each other. Have any of you ever heard this argument in your life? I think so. Yeah. That everyone says they're right, every religion says they're right, and they all contradict each other. Right? You may have heard this once or twice since you joined the Hare Krishna movement. So what's up with that argument? If you look at that argument, for one thing, it's very sloppy. That's the first thing you can notice about it. It's a sloppy argument. Because if you actually study world religions, as I did, I'm the model for the student of world religions, what you find is that they do not all contradict themselves. In fact, it was just like, they agree on an amazing number of things. Now, I made a distinction in a previous class I gave, and some of you have not yet sent in your checks for that class. So don't abuse the credit I've given you. Anyway, there's actually a distinction in religion between historical claims and philosophical claims. Oh no, that was in the Govardhana. Yeah, that was in the Govardhana. Govardhana Puja Festival. So, and as I explained there, historical claims are, by definition, unique, because historical events only happen one time, unless you actually believe that we are involved in eternal repetition of the same thing, which would be very depressing. I mean, I don't know about your life, but if I have to do all the same stupid things I've done in this life, no way. So, right? You don't want to do all the stupid things you've done in this life again and again and again. So therefore, assuming that this wacko idea is not correct and things don't keep happening over and over again, or maybe only in the Twilight Zone. So historical events historical events are unique. They only happen one time. And so even if you say, well, the yugas repeat, but it's like a repetition of seasons. For example, now we are in spring, and there have been millions of springs in this part of the world. And all of those springs are roughly the same. They're similar. Certain things happen, like, you know, certain fruits come out, certain flowers come out, the weather gets warmer. So we can talk about spring as a category. And everyone knows, like if you say spring is coming, any sane human being knows exactly what you're talking about. But that does not mean that everything will happen exactly as it did. Like every tree in this valley will have exactly the same number of leaves that it had last spring, and all the fruit will be exactly the same position on the tree. Or if you look at the average, let's say daily temperature, temperature at night, hour by hour, it's going to be precisely the same. No. Every spring is unique. Every spring is different, but they're all spring. So in the same way, yugas, every yuga is unique, and yet it's a recognizable planetary season. So I'm still making the point that historical events are always unique. And therefore, if a religion is based on some historical claim, like Muhammad is the prophet, or Jesus is the son of God, even if you say Krishna is the origin of everything, and all those statements could be true, by the way, that none of those statements contradict each other, then what's the first thing? The historical claims are unique. However, if you actually pay attention to what people are saying, like you actually pay attention to what Jesus said, Jesus did not walk around Israel claiming to be God. In fact, he didn't do that. He walked around Israel claiming to be a representative of God, and people addressed him. If you read the New Testament, people addressed him as rabbi, not as God. No one said, excuse me, God, can I have a minute? So, and when Jesus was formally charged by the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, he was not accused of claiming to be God, because that would have been like beyond everything in terms of crimes in that culture. But he's not accused of that. No one that ever lived with Jesus said he was God. Jesus never said he didn't say he was God. And the Roman governor who was trying did not accuse him of saying he was God. So if you pay attention to what Jesus says about his relationship to God, you find that he's the Son of God, as we all are, and that even the claim that he's begotten and not created, that he's the Son of God, begotten and not created, that is actually coming from the second Psalm of the Old Testament, and was the way that a king was glorified. Because the second Psalm was written to be recited. It was recited at the coronation of Israeli kings. And so it was actually claiming Jesus was the king of Israel, not God. But anyway, I won't go into all those points. So, but the issue here is that if you pay attention to what Jesus said, if you pay attention to what Buddha said, if you pay attention to what Muhammad said, if you pay attention to what Krishna said, in fact, there's no contradiction. Now, some of the ahistorical interpretations of these respective leaders do contradict each other, but not their own statements. That's one interesting thing. So, and also, even if we find some competing historical claims on the philosophical level, there is a more agreement than disagreement. And that's why you generally don't find so many religious wars taking place between true philosophers. But in any case, when you study world religions, what you do not find is philosophically a bunch of mutually contradictory, competing claims. That's actually not what you find. The situation is more complex. So people that say every religion claims it's the only one, which is not true. And all these religions completely contradict each other, which is also not true. So when someone says that there's so many religions and they all contradict each other, the first thing you know is this person has never studied seriously world religions. So if you look at, in fact, for example, if we find, as we do find, that an overwhelming majority of all the human beings who ever lived on this planet were convinced that they had experienced some type of metaphysical, beyond the physical reality, some type of divine existence, however they understood that, which was real. Some type of divine existence. And even then, if you look at the various ways that people talk about God, there are actually very few of them. The idea that there are like innumerable ways that people define God, and they contradict each other. Again, if everything else fails, try reading about it and actually understanding it. There are only a few conceptions of God throughout all world religions, and I'll go over them, starting at the bottom, which I think is, by the bottom, I mean kind of philosophically. You have, let's say, in the most simple societies that have been least successful in developing what we would call advanced culture, you find animism, from the Greek word anime, which means spirit. Animism is the idea that you just live, there are spirits everywhere, but there's some truth in that. But it's okay, I'll give you the academic term. It's sort of an unrestrained fluid ontology. In this, I'll give you an example, because I actually wrote a paper on this when I was at UCLA, about a very simple group of people living in the Amazon jungle, and what their worldview was. Like, what do you think reality is? And so this is like a typical story. They'll say something like this. I was walking on the forest path, and I saw a jaguar. That jaguar is actually Aunt Elizabeth. And so I went to talk to Aunt Elizabeth, but then she turned into a frog, and that frog was actually my Uncle Pete. And then Uncle Pete turned into a bird and flew away. And so if you try to figure out, like, what are the rules here? Like, are there any, it's hard to find. It's just kind of anything could be anything at any time. And if you say, like, well, it just goes all over the place. Now, when people, you could say, I would say a conceptual step up from animism is polytheism. In polytheism, like take, for example, Greek. We could look at the Vedic thing, or we could say, to be a little more objective, get a little distance. Let's look at Greek mythology, where you have Zeus and Hera, kind of like it's a mom and pop operation. You have Zeus and Hera, a married couple who sort of rule Mount Olympus. They're the most, sort of like Indra and Indrani. And you have other gods. Now, what's interesting here is that people have fixed positions. Like one thing doesn't just constantly turn into something else, and there's no real structure. Anything can be anything. There is a definite structure. There's a political structure in terms of who's in charge of what. For example, Poseidon, is Varuna, the god of the water, and Hades is the god of, god of the underworld, and so on. And so there's a definite fixed political structure, and people always function within that fixed political structure. And they have certain powers. They have certain superhuman powers. Now, interesting, when you study polytheisms around the world, what you tend to find is that in these, whether it's Greek or Japanese or whether it's Roman or whatever, when you look at polytheisms, which tend to be very similar, as if they're talking about the same thing. But when you look at these polytheisms, they almost always say that these gods, even like in the Greek case, Zeus and Hera, they're not the supreme power. There's actually a higher cosmic power which somehow is their origin. So they're not the ultimate origin as in Vedanta, Janmati. They're not the source of everything. They're just kind of like the highest ranking political entities within our little world. And so what is that higher source, kind of that cosmic principle? It's often not really clear. It's not precise. And polytheisms tend to be messy, like the gods are born and they kill their own source. They came from someone else and they kind of ate them or killed them. So it gets a little messy. But you do have a fixed structure, pantheon. The Greek word pan means all, like pantheism means thinking that everything is God, like all of nature is God. Or pandemonium, when all the demons come out. So So anyway, you have pantheon, means all the gods. So then when you go up from polytheism, it's kind of like there's a fork in the road. You can go to impersonalism. So you have animism, polytheism, then you can go to basically impersonalism and personalism. And that's kind of game over. That's kind of it. You can look at all the religions of the world, and you're going to find some. And animism is not like a really strong candidate here. I mean, he couldn't even be the Prime Minister of Australia. So animism is not a strong candidate. Polytheism is kind of like pre-philosophical. That's why Plato wants to do philosophy, because Homer, all this polytheism, it's just not, there's no philosophy. There's no real, serious, rational understanding of life. And so you get animism and polytheism, which you do not find very much among people who are seriously philosophical. When people become more philosophical and actually start thinking in a systematic, logical way about ultimate truth, it generally divides into impersonalism and personalism. And then, of course, on the personal side, you can say, does a personal God have a personal body? Or some people say there's a personal God without a personal body. But that's about it. So this idea of thousands of religions, and they all have different views, and they all contradict each other, it's just, this comes from people who are totally clueless about the history of world religions. There are really very few options. And so therefore what we can do is, for example, if you make a solid argument for personalism against impersonalism, which is very easy, because impersonalism always just reduces down to philosophical nonsense. So if you make an argument for personalism against impersonalism, and then it's like a tournament. You know, okay, you won your first round. Now see if you can win the semifinals. So the first round is against impersonalism. Semifinals, you could say, is, you know, does a personal God have a form? And if you can win that argument, that's it. There's nothing more to do. So again, if you look at world religions, what's the agreement among world religions is far more striking and far more massive than the disagreement. People don't know that because in certain parts of the world, not in all parts of the world, people went to war and killed each other over theological disputes. Have you ever heard the saying that religions cause most of the wars? You ever heard that? Has anyone ever said that in Australia? Okay. Again, first of all, that's kind of chauvinistic because it's taking religion to mean religions in Europe or the Middle East, where you have this tribal religion, tribal monotheism. If you look at Asia, for example, were most of the wars over religion? No, not at all. If you look at Europe, if you look at pre-Christian Europe, there were virtually no religious wars. There were lots of wars. I mean, there was always a war going on somewhere. The Romans never met a war they didn't like. And if you look at Greek, but the Romans weren't fighting wars to bring Jupiter to pagans. They were the pagans. And if you look at the Greco-Roman civilization, because they understood that the same God appears in many different forms with many different names, it would have been absurd in their mind to have a religious war because we're all worshiping the same God. So the Romans fought wars for more wholesome reasons, like, you know, greed for power, and anyway. So in the Greco-Roman world, in general, they did not fight religious wars. In India, people from a so-called Vedic Hindu background did not fight religious wars. The battle of Kurukshetra is Dharma Yuddha. That doesn't mean religious wars like one church against another church, as you'd find in Europe, say, during the Protestant Reformation. It just means, you see, the word dharma is what you have to understand. Dharma is also the word for justice. Dharma is the word for law. So what you're getting here in this verse are the rules of warfare. And these are ethical rules. This dharma vit, the dharma wit, he's a wit, dharma. Actually, it's the same word. So to be a dharma wit, which by the way is how Sanskrit is pronounced. The V is often pronounced like W. Like, for example, if you say Swayamvara, you spell SW, it's pronounced like swa. So the V is actually often a W in Sanskrit. There's a lot of, anyway, there's a lot of linguistic evidence for that. So here, Dharma wit, are you a Dharma wit? So here, a Dharma wit or a Dharma wit is, it's not someone that fights Dharma according to Christianity or Buddhism or Hinduism. It's someone who fights Dharma according to the universal laws, the laws that govern the universe. Because if you break these laws, the universe is going to punish you in the sense of the laws of karma. I don't want to sound too new agey here. Yeah, I couldn't find my car keys and the universe showed me where they were. It's in the sense that there are universal laws of karma. And there's even a verse in Mahabharata that dharma himsito himsiti. When dharma is attacked, dharma attacks. That if you injure dharma, dharma will injure you. And so we're talking about reciprocal, retroactive, cosmic laws here. And of course, because all such laws ultimately come from God, they're the laws of God. But if there is a God, and there is, and if there are objective laws of God, then by following those, you are not being religious in a sense. You're simply following the objective laws that govern the universe. For example, there's an objective law in the universe called gravity. And so it really doesn't matter, what your religion is. You could be any religion, karma, jnana, yogi. If you jump off the building, you will go down and not up, or sideways. You won't go sideways either. And so the law of gravity is a law of God. You could say that, for example, the law of gravity is a religious law because it's the law of God. So that's the idea here. So by religious, if we take the word religion in its original sense, we can use that word because, interestingly, the word religion etymologically means the same thing as the word yoga. That's interesting. If you ever use that when you're preaching, please send me something as a token of your appreciation. Because it's just like a ligament. A ligament is something that connects parts of the body. And so in Latin, ligare means to connect. Ligare, so re-ligare, to reconnect. So religion really means reconnecting. And that's what yoga means. Yoga means link, connection. So the word religion actually has basically the same meaning as the word yoga. So anyway, so these are religious principles in the sense that they are principles by which we connect ourselves to God, we connect ourselves just to civilization, we comply with our social contract, which is ultimately a God-given system, because Krishna creates the Varnashram system. Varnashram is just the supreme social contract, in which everyone follows the rules, and so there's no accidents on the road. Everyone can drive their own little car, their body. The body is often compared in the Vedas to a vehicle. So you can drive your little car. What was that Beatles song? Baby, let me drive your car. Oh, baby, you can drive my car. Yeah. Thank you. I stand corrected. So it's just like, the Vedas says, Shariram Ratam, Sharira Ratamuchite. The body is said to be the vehicle, the car, the Rata. And so here we are driving our bodies all over, and we have so many desires. And yet, by Dharma, by the law, these are the traffic laws. This is the social contract. So if you follow your duties as a man, as a woman, as a teacher, as a worker, as a ruler, whatever you are, it's like a grid. It's like a map, a graph. To locate something on a graph, you need a vertical axis and a horizontal axis, right? If you have those two axes, then you can find out where you are on the grid. And that's exactly what Vedic culture does. It gives a vertical and a horizontal axis. Your Varna and your Ashram. So therefore saying, for example, it's saying kind of dumb things like women should always do this. Well, you're talking about a Brahmana, you're talking about a Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. So you cannot locate a woman or a man on a single axis. You have to have both. So that's why general statements about men and women are often inaccurate, because you're not paying attention to the God-given social system. So if you say that a Brahmin woman is less intelligent than a Shudra man, you're delusional. And so, yes, we have to actually pay attention to both lines, you know, vertical and horizontal, and then you can actually locate people and see where they're at within the social system. Anyway, these are some thoughts on Dharma I thought I would share with you. So, any questions? Yes, back there, your ladyship.
Okay, thank you. If you wouldn't mind commenting, Hare Krishna. I wanted to make a comment about our ISKCON society. And it seems something very unique about our religion is that we try to make Brahmanas, we've always tried to make everyone who comes to the movement a Brahmana. I mean, years ago, we would go out and preach and bring people, shake them up, they were guys, and then, you know, each 6 months' time, they'd have Brahman initiation, and they could do Brahminical duties. And I think it's changing now.
Oh, it's changed a lot.
I don't get out much now. I used to travel so much, or constantly.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
So if you could comment about this, because you find that people are reluctant to come because, oh, you have to do, and I try to preach to people, no, you don't have to do this. You don't have to be like this and give up this.
Prabhupada himself said that. Prabhupada noticed early on, I read a letter from Prabhupada, this is, well, back in the mid-70s maybe. No, actually, it was a transcription of Prabhupada, I think, in Darshan. And Prabhupada commented that most of the people joining ISKCON were not Brahmins. That's one of the reasons he wanted his devotees to buy land, to give engagement for other people. So, I mean, the other hand, I mean, I completely agree with you. There's also the point that there is a desperate historical need to reconstitute a Brahmin class. Because the so-called Brahmin class in India has been hereditary for so long, and it's just, you know, it's basically not really serving any purpose. For example, what if, let's say, medical degrees, what if medical licenses, your right to be a medical doctor and perform surgery and do things, what if that was hereditary? What if that was hereditary? So this is what we could imagine would happen. Let's say, for example, in a very conservative, pre-industrial, extended family society like India was, you do get tremendous conservatism, social and cultural conservatism. However, that social conservatism, which means people tend to, you know, do what their parents did, is also counteracted. There's a huge drift. It starts to really drift away from the real science, because mixed with that social, because actually here's a really interesting point, really interesting sociological point, which you will hear for the first time. This first time it's ever occurred. Ready? Take a deep breath. Okay. One of the main reasons, one of the central reasons that a conservative society, pre-industrial society especially, is so conservative is because people are so obsessively attached to their families. Not only attached to their families, which is normal, but almost obsessively so, in the sense that they totally identify with their families. What that means is that ultimately it may be in the public's interest, that only qualified Brahmins be certified, be given the Upanayana and so on and so forth, Brahmin thread, and just sort of respected as Brahmins. That may be in the it is in the public interest, but often that will be counteracted by family attachment. And so, well, little Johnny's trying his best, give him the Brahmin thread, you know, or little Punkaja or something. So the idea is you have this, so the family attachment is one of the main drivers of the social conservatism, but it's a perfect example of, let's say, Hegel's historical dialectic in which the status quo generates its own contradiction. Because the dialectic means, status quo just means, the way things are now. And then Hegel pointed out, and then of course Marx kind of took it in various directions, that a particular status quo, just the way things are now, produces its own contradiction. And by this contradiction, a new reality emerges through this struggle, which is called the synthesis. The S-Y-N, the synthesis, by the way, being Sanskrit, from the Sanskrit sam, S-A-M, like Sankirtan, which means together, so S-Y-N in Greek. The together thesis, the synthesis. So, like for example, let's say you have capitalism, and the purpose of capitalism is to allow anyone to acquire wealth if they have the ability and the determination, they can acquire wealth. But what happens is, here's how that system generates its own contradiction. You get some people who are really good at acquiring wealth. It comes to a tipping point, so to speak, where it's like the more money you have, the more money you can make, and that starts to expand exponentially because you have the financial resources to invest, you can corner the market, you can create a monopoly, and so you not only just in sort of an incremental way make more and more money, but you start to exponentially make money. And the people, it's just like in a fight. Let's say there's like a fight, and it's sort of evenly matched, and they're trading blows and everything. And then at a certain point, let's say one of the fighters lands a really good blow, and the other person's shaken up. And so a fight, which was kind of equal for a long time, in a few seconds, suddenly goes straight down for one of them. As soon as one fighter sees his enemy's kind of shaken up, he just pours it on, blows, and like in 5 seconds it can be over. And so there's this principle that things often don't simply expand or increase or decrease incrementally, but there's a tipping point where it just accelerates tremendously. And so let's say originally, because capitalism originally was meant as a left-wing, capitalism was a left-wing program. It was a left-wing radical program. Why? Because European economies were controlled by feudal lords. The nobles owned all the land. There was an agrarian economy. The economy was based on land, and the nobles owned all the land. And if you weren't a noble, you probably worked for a noble. And so therefore, the Industrial Revolution was a leftist project. Capitalism was not right. Now it's, laissez-faire capitalism, like the government shouldn't restrict capitalists. They can just do whatever they want. Now it's like a far right idea. When it began, it was a far left idea. Because the idea was that common people, commoners, who for centuries and centuries had been totally dominated by the rich, by the nobles, suddenly they could acquire wealth and the nobles couldn't stop them because they could open factories. And so therefore an economic strategy or an economic system which was on the left, which was meant to free common people from the tyranny of nobles, as to be expected, the capitalists became the new tyrants. And of course, most of the nobles in Europe have to turn their palaces and castles into Airbnb things, just to pay the taxes and, cut the lawn. So, but that's an example how a status quo, which is the new industrialization, the new wealth for common people, they're increasing rights, and with that new wealth, they could build schools, common people could be educated, because there used to be in England, for example, and in other parts of Europe, this extreme divide between a minority of the population, which was educated and highly educated, actually more educated than almost anyone nowadays, and then you had everybody else who was highly uneducated. And so you had capitalism actually meant wealth for common people, it meant education for common people, it meant they could buy political rights. And so you could say it dramatically increased the position of a lot of people. However, capitalists were out of control, and you start to get, and so what's supposed to be, let's say, democracy or whatever it is, republicanism, turns into plutocracy, ruled by the rich. And the rich people become the new tyrants. Today's revolutionary is almost always tomorrow's dictator. Today's freedom fighter is tomorrow's tyrant. And history just has too much of that. So this revolutionary capitalism to free common people generated its own contradiction, which was opposition to exploitative, abusive capitalism. It generated its own contradiction. And so, what was the original topic about generating? Got into this?
About Brahmins.
Yeah, about Brahmins and ISKCON. So, what? Yeah. But, so in ISKCON, I forgot exactly what I was going to make about that, but in ISKCON, you get, systems that generate their own contradictions. So in the beginning, you have everyone has to be a Brahmin, and then I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example of something that really applies in ISKCON. In the early days of the movement, because we were all young, as I always say, Vedic Lord of the Flies, we were all very young. And actually, scientific studies show when you get populations that don't have elders, it's all young people, you tend to get antisocial behavior, you get self-destructive behavior, extremism. And so ISKCON extremism, like extreme self-sacrifice, in the early days of the movement, if you even have a nature, I mean, Krishna says you have to follow your nature. But in the early days, if you even admitted that you had a nature, that was sense gratification. Because you're really supposed to do whatever happens to be needed on any given day. And so then it actually produced in ISKCON an extreme of self-indulgence. Because there very much is the psychological pendulum effect. So if you have a movement which, because of immaturity, goes to extremes of self-denial, self-sacrifice, self-abnegation, it will very predictably bounce to the other extreme of self-indulgence. Which is probably one of the main reasons it's so hard to organize a real powerful preaching mission, this non-united preaching mission, because everyone wants to do what everybody wants to do. And so actually to sort of form an ISKCON army, to have a united preaching mission where we really start to be somebody in the world, because in unity there's strength, right? In unity there's strength. And so ISKCON, it's like, for example, ISKCON, I think it's comparable to Renaissance and modern Italy. If you look at the Roman Empire and Roman Republic even, the Romans were the great team builders, the great organizers, they could engineer bridges. You read these amazing stories where, like, the Romans would be in one of their usual, forays into Germany, trying to conquer, reconquer, or just push back Germanic tribes. And they had to cross a river, like the Rhine. The Rhine was like a big boundary. The Rhine River. So they would have this whole Roman army with, like, heavy cars carrying tons of stuff, and they would just build a bridge over it. I mean, a bridge that an army can cross, not like a little footbridge. They would build a bridge that an army could cross, like, in 24 hours. So they were like these organizational monsters, the Romans, and that's why they were successful. But they were also social engineers. I won't go into all the details, but they were really expert at team building. That's why they could have an empire. But what happened? It became so heavy. The Roman Empire became so, you could say, abusive. It generated an equal and opposite extreme, namely the most decentralized country in Western Europe, Italy. So the most centralized place in Europe became the most decentralized place. And you get Italian city-states where Italians, like, I don't even want to belong to another city. Like one city, like, you couldn't even convince Italians to, have two cities together. And so it became the most decentralized. So in other words, it generated its own opposite. And so in ISKCON, because we were very immature, and we went to, in that zealous immaturity, the devotees went to these extremes of self-denial, self-sacrifice, it created its own opposite, which is a huge amount of self-indulgence. And because that is now the new normal, it's like everybody just doing whatever they want to do, and no one has to follow anyone else unless they really want to. It's become very difficult to organize anything like a united preaching mission. I mean, we're all united because, we're all spiritual family. So, we're all part of the same movement. But to really have an organized, powerful, united preaching front has become very difficult because we're still in the stage where everybody does whatever they want. And so the synthesis is that you have to come back to the middle where we keep our maturity. We're not going to go back, to that stuff. We keep our maturity. We keep our concern for our physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual health. We keep that. We act like adults. We respect each other. At the same time, we have enough intelligence and sincerity to unite and form a powerful preaching. So, someone here? Yes. Oh, maybe first here, and then this young lady. Oh, yeah, the microphone, sure. Thank you.
Krishna, thank you for your class. I just have one question about when understanding what your dharma is or what your purpose is or what your duty is, that could previously be determined or still could be determined by Varnashram Dharma or what placement you are in your life. But I'm saying this day and age, it's often found that there's a mixture or combination in this day and age. So
yes. Yeah, good point. First of all, as Prabhupada said, the Varna system, because the ashrams we have among civilized devotees. So if we want to talk about the Varnas, and Krishna says he created the system, Prabhupada said, and it's obvious, and Western scholars say, it depends upon an agrarian economy. Because when people live on the land, like here, life is much more simple. That's why a lot of you live here, because it's much more simple, peaceful life. But the point is that in industrial, post-industrial society, it's like thousands of times more complicated, which is why, we all live in pharmaceutical nations, where half the people in our countries are taking some kind of pharmaceutical to get up in the morning, because it's very stressful. So in a modern world like the one we live in, there's hundreds of different, for example, let's say your natural vocation is to teach. You want to be a simple teacher. So you're a Brahmin. But in order to teach and just get enough money to live on, you have to be an employee. But an employee is a Shudra. So you're a Brahmin because you teach, but you're being forced into the Shudra position of being an employee. Or let's say, for example, for various historical reasons now, we don't have military governments in the modern world, at least not in what we would call free societies. And yet, so therefore, let's say you're a warrior by nature. Again, by nature you're a warrior, but you're forced into a Shudra position because you have to just take orders humbly from usually a corrupt politician. So you have a corrupt politician just, bossing around someone who actually is a warrior. So, or for example, let's say one of the duties of Vaishyas is cow protection. However, the reason we have adopt-a-cow programs in ISKCON is because the world economy has been set up in such a way that cow protection is a real problem. You see, in an agrarian society, the more cows you have, the richer you are. And that's called Govardhana, cow wealth. And that was the measure of wealth, among other measures, also how many grains you had. So that, for example, because the world population was smaller, because they didn't fence land, fencing is something that happened fairly recently, maybe 300 years ago. Before, land was not fenced. It was just the earth. It was God's earth. And of course, some people owned land, but there were, like for example, in England. To this day, you can see there's footpaths. So one of the really great things about England, besides the fact that certain writers were born there, but one of the really great things about England is that they have these old right-of-ways that go back God knows how long, where you can just sort of walk across England on footpaths, and you have the right to walk across people's land, right? Footpaths, jump over the stiles. And so, and also in Sweden, for example, you can camp on people's land. I mean, obviously you can't abuse that right, but you can just walk across Sweden. You have a right to walk across the land. You can, bed down for the night under a tree on someone's land. That's the way the world used to be. And so in a world like that, the more cows you have, there's always grazing land. And they fertilize the land in their inimitable way. However, now with capitalism, the rise of capitalism, land was not just God's earth, it was a commodity. Land was capital. In other words, you assess your land, it's worth so much, and so everything, whether it's land or human labor, everything is transformed into a mathematical statement. It's worth so much capital. That's what capitalism, by the way, is. I mean, people don't understand that. Socialists don't understand that. That capitalist doesn't mean free market. There are always free markets, or in most places. Capitalism is not, that's not what was new about capitalism. That you have free market, there were free markets before there was ever capitalism. Capitalism means that everything in life, including land, people, animals, everything is expressed as a quantity of capital. So a human being is worth so many capital points, like the labor force. Or an animal is just so many dollars. Or land is so many dollars. Everything ultimately stands for a number, which is its capital price. And that's really the evil of capitalism. It turns everything into capital. So, but having a lot of cows and capital, what was the original question? Varna. Yeah, so let's say you're a farmer. Let's say you're a Vaishya, you want to protect cows. Very difficult. Because I mean, here up in this part of the country, you know, fortunately, before land in this region became super capitalized, which is what happened. So there was a time in Australia, I remember back in the time when this land was bought, where I was kind of amazed because in Australia you get these huge pieces of land for like very low prices. And then what happened is, you know, with world trade, because, you know, there's only so much that Australians can eat. But when you start world trade, when you start to transform a domestic economy into a global economy, you're no longer just, you know, growing food for Australians, you're growing food for the world. And the more you can sell, the more money you make. And that jacked up the land prices. And land was no longer like this is Australia, you know, you want some land or some land. It was like suddenly land is capital and the prices go up. And so if you weren't lucky, it's like, for example, in Los Angeles, the real estate prices have become like literally almost unbelievable. I mean, like in the city of Santa Monica, the average home price, and there's a lot of little houses, the average home price is probably like about $1.5 million US dollars. And if you go into the nicer neighborhoods of Santa Monica, which is, you know, just the beach next to where I live. If you go to the nicer neighborhood of Santa Monica, the average home price is probably more like $6 million, average home price. These are not huge mansions on huge estates, they're nice houses, but the average home price is $6 million. So, unfortunately, my family, because we were born there, you know, they had all kinds of properties. They're doing very well. They have property from, you know, from before, but if you want to buy into the LA real estate market, you better be a millionaire if you just want to get a little fixer-upper. You know, if you're just a millionaire, like you only have like $1 million or a couple $1 million, you can get a fixer-upper, you know. But so in the same way, in Australia, if you're new to the land market, if you don't own land from before, it's very tough. And so the whole rural economy, the whole economy is based on the assumption that you will kill your cows when they stop milking or just when they're old enough to be, you know, whatever. And so if you keep the cows, there's no longer free land, there's no longer free grazing land. People don't live in extended families. You see, it is another point. In an agrarian economy, the bigger your family, the richer you are, because there's more hands to work. Because, as you know, if you live on the land, there's an unlimited amount of work to do. There's never nothing to do on a farm. And so the bigger your family, the richer you are. If you live in a city, the bigger your family, the poorer you are. And so there was this powerful economic pressure to reduce the size of families. And hence you get the nuclear family. Now they split the atom. So again, that's what Marx was talking about, all these economic pressures to reduce the size of families. Everything is turned into capital. And so if you're a Vaishya, you want to protect cows, you better be very wealthy. Or you better own a lot of land that someone bought a long time ago. If you want to protect cows. Because if you buy land today, you're going to pay so much for the land, you're going to pay so much for veterinarians, you are going to pay so much for feed, you're going to pay so much for fencing, and God forbid you have to hire somebody. You have to hire, you're going to pay so much that, you know, like a gallon of milk is going to cost, like, I don't know, like, you know, 50 Australian dollars. And hence the Adopt a Cow program. And the Adopt a Cow program is evidence of how impractical and difficult it is in this age. So again, you're a Vaishya, you want to protect cows. In fact, there's one devotee in America, Prabhupada, who's one of the best, he's one of the most successful in just organizing farms and everything and turning that into preaching, one of the most successful. And he said, I mean, I'm not agreeing with him, I'm just saying he's been practically the most successful at the actual economics of devotee farms. And he said the biggest mistake was in so many devotee farms, cow protection. I'm not arguing against cow protection. You have a great program here. I totally support it, really. It's just that I'm saying, he's saying that if someone is buying land today, you don't own a large piece of land, you're buying land today, you better have a lot of money, or you better have a lot of rich patrons if you want to have a lot of cows. And so, and I bring that up to show you the problem in this age. The problem in this age, if you want to be a Kshatriya, a Vaishya, a Brahmana, and that's why everything's mixed, and it's very difficult. That's why Prabhupada, when he said we should set the Varna system, that's when he said we should buy land instead of farm, because he understood the connection between an agrarian economy and a simple Varna system. Yes, last question perhaps, because I actually have to travel to you. Oh my God.
Just on the,
Oh my God, it's 9 o'clock.
just on the word Dharma,
Yes.
there was an expression back in the day when they had people like Jack Kerouac and Timothy Leary and
Dharma bums. Yeah.
Dharma bums. So I just wanted to, you know, on that, how they picked up that, what they meant by that.
Probably got it from Buddhism. Because in Buddhism, Dharma, since they don't have God, usually, although in Mahayana Buddhism, it's a very different thing, but that's another story. Yeah, because Buddhism really focused on Dharma. And so therefore they were kind of like wannabe Buddhists, chilling out on the road, and so they were Dharma bums.
Great, thank you.
So thank you all very much, and Hare Krishna.
That's one kick.